For a ghost story to be scary, it needs to be believable. For it to be believable, you need to have credible witnesses that independently can corroborate each other's stories. And in today's ghost story, we have 3 police officers that do just that. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, then please put the like button's feet into cement and then throw it into the ocean. Also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 2006, Dave Murphy had just become a police officer in Salt Lake City, Utah. His first role was as a protective service officer, which meant he'd be in charge of physical security at a number of the county facilities. Dave's first facility was the Capital City Theater, which is a landmark inside of Salt Lake City. It's been around since the early 1900s. It's this beautiful, grand theater. So in early August, Dave reports to the Capital City Theater for his first day on the job, and he meets his partner, an officer by the name of Morgan Matthews. He gets there on this first day, and right away, Dave would say that Morgan was just strictly business. The first place that Morgan takes Dave is the control room, which sits on the first floor of the theater. The theater had 3 floors, and then it also had a basement as well. So the control room was on that first floor. Inside of the control room were all of these security monitors, because there was all these cameras set up inside of the theater. The cameras weren't great though. You pretty much could only tell what was in frame if there was a light on, and most of the time at night especially, lights were off. Once they were done looking at the control room, Morgan says to Dave, now we're gonna go do our rounds. This is something we do every time you get to the theater. You do a security round and make sure everything's locked, all the lights are off. Before you come back to the control room, you'll do that at the beginning of your shift and at the end of your shift. Morgan brings Dave downstairs, and it's the first time Dave is seeing the basement, and he's shocked by how big it is. It is this massive hallway that stretches way down. In the middle of the hall is a piano that's just sitting out in the middle, and the lighting's not good down there. This is a very old theater. Everything in the building was pretty old. And Dave remembers thinking that he was immediately creeped out by this scene, this long hallway with all these doors and this piano right in the middle of the hallway. And he's thinking to himself, I don't want to spend much time down here. This is so creepy. But they go down the hall, they check all the doors, they make their way up to the main floor, the second floor, the third floor, everything gets checked. And so after they do this security round, Dave and Morgan go back to the control room, and Dave is anticipating getting to know Morgan a little bit. This is their first night. They're going to be working together a lot. And Dave would say that Morgan just seemed really cold and just did not want to talk to Dave very much. And as soon as their shift was almost over, Morgan was very eager to just knock out the security rounds and just get out of that building. At the end of that night, Dave remembers thinking that there's just something off about Morgan's behavior. It seemed like Morgan really didn't like being in the theater. And it would turn out that he was onto something, because Morgan didn't like being in that building. But it would take him a while to share with Dave why. Over the next couple of days, Morgan and Dave would do their security rounds together. Because Dave's in training, Morgan's teaching him. But on August 9th, which is 2 days after Dave's first day on the job, Morgan was confident that Dave knew how to secure the whole building. And so at the end of the night, he tells Dave, why don't you do the security rounds yourself? Dave feels very confident that he knows how to do it. He goes down into the basement, makes sure all the doors are shut and locked, that the lights are off, finishes the basement, goes up to the first floor where the control room is, and checks all the rooms on that floor. He goes into the main auditorium space. He's checking all the different nooks and crannies to make sure there's nobody hiding in there. He goes up to the second floor. He checks all the different rooms up there and the balcony. Makes his way up to the third floor where there's all the offices of staff that work at the theater. At the end of the search, the last room he would check was the rehearsal room. And it was the only room where there was no door to it. So you'd poke your head in, kind of look around, make sure no one was in there, and then you would leave, and that's the end of your check. So Dave gets to the rehearsal room, he flips the light on, and he looks inside, doesn't see anybody, is satisfied that no one's in there, turns the light off, and as he's about to turn back into the hallway, he hears a door slam with tremendous force right across the hallway from where he was, and it was the bathroom door. And his first reaction is someone just ran out of the bathroom. Someone who had snuck into the building must have run out of the bathroom, and they're making a break for it to get out of the theater before I catch them. And so he instinctively picks up his radio and he calls to Morgan and says, someone's on the third floor. But when Morgan looks at the camera, he doesn't see anybody. At this point, Dave's drawn his weapon, and he's looking down the hall. He doesn't see anybody. And as he's waiting for Morgan to come upstairs to back him up so they can go look for this person that's just ran down the hall, he realizes two things. One, just because he heard the door slam doesn't mean they left and slammed it. They could be in the bathroom. And so he's thinking to himself, someone could be in the bathroom right now. Maybe that's why we didn't see him on the camera. And then the second thing he thought of is that door, the bathroom door, can't slam. It's got this huge hydraulic hinge to it. It can't slam. So his gun is drawn and he's aiming it at the bathroom door right as Morgan comes up on his right. Morgan draws his pistol, he's got it on the door as well, and they make entry into the bathroom. They clear all the different spaces in the bathroom and no one's in there, and there's no way to get out of there. Morgan and Dave are like, okay, well, they must not have come in here. They must have run out of the bathroom. They're somewhere in the theater. And so they decide they're going to search the entire building and find this person that clearly was just in the bathroom, and that's how they slammed the door. We're not going to worry about how they slammed the door with the hydraulic hinge. We just know it was slammed somehow. So they leave the bathroom, guns still drawn, and they start making their way down the hall. They're checking all the doors, everything is locked. When they start making their way downstairs to the second floor, Dave recognizes through the door, because there's a door leading onto the second floor, he can see that the lights are on, and he had turned them off. And so as they're walking down the stairs, he says to Morgan, hey, did you turn the lights on the second floor? And Morgan's like, no. And so they think that whoever was here, whoever was in the bathroom is on the second floor. They must have turned the lights on. They go into the second floor, and not only are the lights on, but all the doors on the second floor had been opened. They search the entire second floor. They search every single room. No one's on the second floor. They turn off the lights, they shut all the doors, everything's locked. When they went down to the first floor, everything was the way it should have been, locked, lights off, nothing down there. And they go down to the basement, and even though it was creepy being down there because they've now searched the whole building and they're anticipating coming in contact with whoever is here, assuming they haven't left the building yet, and there's no one down there. They decided to review the footage from the third floor to see if they could pick up someone running in the hall around the time that door slammed, but the camera was not trained on the bathroom door. So you just have this view down the hall. You can't see the bathroom specifically, not to mention the hallway is dark and the cameras are terrible without light. And so all they're able to see is the light go on in the rehearsal room while Dave is doing his last check in there. The lights turn off because Dave's about to turn around. And then after that, you just hear this massive slam of this door, but you can't see what happened. So they don't know what to make of it. They're both very much on edge that someone might still be in the building. And so they do another sweep of the building and no one's there. And so they decide to just chalk it up and say, we were hearing things and seeing things. I'm sure it's fine. Let's just get out of here. And they leave. A couple of days later, on August 11th, Morgan is working alone. Dave wasn't coming in that day, so Morgan's alone in the theater doing a shift. And at some point in the night, as he's sitting in the control room, he thinks he hears whispering in the hall right behind him. And so after the experience he had with Dave a couple nights ago, he's on edge. So he draws his pistol right away. And so he goes out into the hallway, and immediately when he steps into the hall, the whispering seems to go farther and farther away from him down the hall. So he gets out there, he's looking around, he can't see anything. He makes his way down the hallway towards the stairs that go down into the basement, or if he wanted to go up to the second floor. And when he gets to the top of the stairwell, he's gun drawn, looking down, looking up. He hears what sounds like coughing coming from the basement. And at this point, Morgan said that he was actually pretty scared. I mean, imagine being alone in this theater. Just a couple of days earlier, you've had this weird experience with slamming doors and doors being opened and lights going on that somebody else, another police officer, witnessed with you. You're alone in this theater and you're hearing coughing coming from the basement after hearing voices behind you. That's pretty terrifying. So he very slowly starts going down the stairwell. He's getting ready to clear the corner, and just as he does, the coughing stops. He turns the lights on and he looks down the hall and there's nothing there. He starts making his way down the hall. He's checking every door, making sure it's locked, making sure that everything is secure. And he gets all the way down the hall, and as he's almost done checking the basement, he smells smoke, and it's coming from a door right next to him. And so he unlocks that door and he goes in, and there's no fire, but all he can smell is smoke. So he turns the light on, he's looking around, there's no fire. He's convinced that somewhere down in the basement there's a fire. He goes to every single room and he keeps checking and there's nothing. And then at some point the smoke smell dissipates. He checks every space in the theater to look for a fire, and there's no fire. He's wondering if he should call the fire department, but he's thinking, what would I tell them? There's no fire. And so he ultimately, after checking 3-4 times and being very confident there wasn't a fire, he just says, okay, no fire. I guess I was just smelling things. A few weeks later, on September 4th, Dave has just arrived at the theater. He's there a little bit early. Their shift started at 5 p.m. He was there at about 4:30. And when he walked into the building, He sees that there are 3 staff members sitting at the front desk talking to each other, and as he walks past, one of them is talking about ghosts inside of the theater, and it immediately piques his interest. And so he walked over to the guy talking about ghosts, and he introduced himself. And it turned out that this guy was a man named Blair Fuller, who was a senior accountant at the theater. And so Dave asked Blair, what are you talking about with ghosts in the theater? Because I provide physical security here, and I've seen some strange things here. I just love to hear what you have to say about it. So they head up to the 3rd floor where Blair's office was, and they sit down, and Blair says, okay, I got a doozy for you. This happened to me a couple years ago. I was actually in this office. It was about 10 o'clock at night. I was doing some work and I heard the elevator kick on. Now, the elevator was right outside of his office, and anytime it was on, the engine was really loud. It was really obvious if the elevator was moving around. And so he's doing his accounting work and he hears that engine kick on. He doesn't think much of it, but then it clicks that he's the only one in the building. And so he kind of looks out the glass window of his office. He had a closed door office with 2 windows looking out into the foyer where there's this elevator, and he looks out and he can see that the little lights above the elevator showing what floor it's on have lit up and it's going up. So the elevator was in the basement and now it's in the 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. The door's open and there's no one there. And at this point, Blair says that he wasn't concerned. He figured, okay, maybe there's some maintenance, maybe it's scheduled to do that, who knows. But after a little while, the alarm goes off in the elevator to signify that something is obstructing the door from shutting. And he's looking out the window and he hears this alarm, this like ringing sound going off, but the door isn't shutting. And he's like, there's nothing obstructing the door, why isn't it shutting? And so he leaves his office and he kind of walks over to the elevator and he walks into the elevator. He said immediately he felt this massive drop in temperature inside of the elevator. And as he's standing there, he turns around. Now he's looking back towards his office inside of the elevator. The doors start to shut. And for whatever reason, he said, I didn't get off. I just decided I'm going to ride this elevator. The basement button lights up as if someone had pressed basement, and they start going down. And he's sitting there thinking, what in the world is going on? It was just on an alarm because the door wasn't shutting. And then miraculously, when I go inside of it, it suddenly works again and it's going to the basement. So he goes to the basement, the door opens, there's no one there. He steps out and Blair says that it took all of his courage to yell out, hey, is anyone down here? And as soon as he did and he didn't hear a response, he said he didn't want to make any more sound. The elevator sat in the middle of the hall in the basement. It's that huge hall with that piano sitting right in the middle. The lights are off. And he pokes his head down one way. There's nothing down there. He sees the piano barely from the light of the elevator. And he looks down the other way. There's no one there. And at this point, he's just so spooked. He just gets back in the elevator and he hits floor 3, floor 3, floor 3. And he's hitting like door close, door close, door close. The door closes and he goes back up to his office. He goes into his office and he shuts the door and he sits down and he's thinking like, what was that? Why did that just happen? I got to find out if they're running maintenance or something. And as he's sitting in his chair thinking about this strange experience, he hears what sounds like banging sounds coming from outside of his office in that foyer near the elevator. He just goes to his door and he opens it up and he pokes his head into the foyer and he looks to the side and there's this big filing cabinet and all of the cabinets are out. They've all been pulled out. He certainly didn't do this. And it was as if someone was one by one pushing each of them shut. These big heavy cabinets. And he's watching as one by one these things are slamming shut. One by one until the whole thing is shut. And so he goes over and he's like trying to disprove what he just saw, that he can open up a drawer and that it will shut on its own. But none of them shut on their own. You have to shut it. Something has to shut it for it to shut. And so he packed up for the day and left and did not work another night shift at the theater. Later that night, Dave would share Blair's story with Morgan. He wasn't really sure how Morgan was going to react, but Morgan actually would open up and he would say, you know, before you started working here, I always felt like I was being watched when I was here. And then we had that experience, obviously, where the lights are coming on and you heard that banging from that bathroom door. And then just a few days ago, I heard voices coming from the hall and I heard someone coughing in the basement and I smelled smoke and there was no one there. And so they start going back and forth, exchanging stories of just how uncomfortable this place made them feel. And so they're wondering what they should do about this. And Dave has this idea. He's like, my best friend, I'll invite him to come over here one night and we'll tell him that we're giving him a tour of the building and we'll just see what he says. We'll see if he reacts to anything here. Who knows? You know, maybe something strange will happen and then we'll have another person validate it. Morgan thinks that's a good idea, and so Dave reaches out to his best friend, Greg. Greg would say that he was a little bit surprised to be getting this offer to come take a tour of the theater, but he was interested, and since Dave was asking, he figured he would oblige him, and so Greg agrees to come to the theater and take a tour. So the next day, Dave and Morgan are at the theater, and Greg shows up, and so they start this tour. They go in the main auditorium, they're looking around, and then make their way into the basement. Morgan turns on the light, and Morgan and Dave instantly see a little ways down the hall on the left, one of the doors has been opened. And so Dave and Morgan push Greg out of the way. They draw their pistols, and they're aimed at the open door. And so Greg just stays behind them as Morgan and Dave make their way down to this open door. And when they get right outside the door and they're about to push it open to go inside, the door slams shut right in front of Greg and Dave and Morgan. And they all are looking at each other like, what's going on? But before they can do anything, the door handle starts rattling really aggressively. After the rattling stops, Dave and Morgan look at each other and they nod their head like, we gotta go in there. Greg is scared about being out in the hall alone, and so he just follows them in. And so the three of them go into this room. Dave and Morgan are, pistols drawn. It's a small room. There's no one in there. Light switch on, no one in there. Greg suddenly gasps and he points to the corner and he says, someone's sitting in the corner. And Dave and Morgan immediately train their guns on what's in the corner, but no one's there. And Greg's like, I just saw someone sitting in the corner. It looked like he had a hood on, he had like a sweatshirt on, I don't know, but he was right there. And so Dave and Morgan, they're freaked out because they brought Greg here on some level to disprove the strangeness. And now the three of them have seen a door slam that shouldn't have been open in the first place. Greg's claiming to have seen a figure sitting in the corner. This scared the crap out of all three of them. They quickly left, locked, shut off the lights, went upstairs. Greg's like, I'm out of here. Greg leaves. And Dave and Morgan are like, now what? So at this point, all the strangeness that was happening in the theater was getting reported, but it was being reported in a way that Dave and Morgan didn't seem like they were referencing something haunted, but rather someone was breaking in. Ultimately, the county installed new cameras inside of the theater. These updated cameras had infrared technology, which allowed them to see better when the lights were off. They were hoping that this would allow them to catch whoever was breaking in practically every time Dave and Morgan are on shift. So on the day that it was installed, September 15th, Morgan is working there alone. And he's sitting in the control room looking at the different cameras, and he's kind of playing around with the different screens and seeing what each of the cameras can do. And at some point, something catches his eye in one of the screens. In the main auditorium, it appeared like someone might be sitting in one of the seats, but the camera was zoomed back enough that he couldn't get a clear picture. And he didn't know what was normal in any of these cameras because this is the first time he's looking at any of these screens. And so he's looking at the camera really closely and he thinks he sees someone, he can't really tell, that has a hood on or a shroud on that's just sitting in the middle of the theater. And it starts turning its head like this. And he can see clear as day a set of eyes. And before Morgan has a chance to do it, it just starts raising into the ceiling and disappears. Morgan didn't even check to see what it was. He was done. He literally quit that day. That was his last day at the theater. A couple of weeks after Morgan has quit and Dave is working alone at the theater, he's in the control room, and all of a sudden he hears a piano playing. And there's only one piano in the entire theater, and it's sitting in the basement. It's his job to protect this place, so he knows he has to go down and check because it could be some hooligan in the building somewhere. So he leaves the control room, and as he starts walking over to the stairs with his gun drawn, the music is getting louder and louder, the piano is getting louder and louder and louder. He makes his way down the steps, and as he's about to turn the corner, he hears the guard that protects the keys on the piano slam shut, and the piano stops. Then he turns around the corner and he looks, and there's no one down there. He flips on the light, no one's in the hall. He knows he's not going to find anyone down here. It's this entity that's causing all this mayhem inside of the theater. Dave's seen enough. He's done. He's done with this theater, and he goes right back upstairs. He goes in the control room, locks it, stays there till the end of his shift, and then he is out. And the next day, he goes to his sergeant and he says, you can't ever put me back inside that theater or I will quit. And so sure enough, he was transferred. Over the next 2 months, they didn't have anyone who could do full-time security at the theater. So different random officers would be there for a couple hours, a couple of days a week, until November 26th. They found another officer, a veteran police officer named Josh Thomas, who was going to be working at the theater full-time. On November 26th, the first night that Josh Thomas was going to be there, he didn't have anyone to turn over with, so he was just alone at the theater. And it just so happens that Dave is in a patrol car near the theater. when at some point in the night, Josh comes over the radio and says, "Hey, I need backup right now. Someone has broken into the theater." Dave knows that it's probably not someone breaking in. He knows what's going on inside that theater. He was the closest to it. And even though he did not want to go, he felt like it was his responsibility to go to that theater and be Josh's backup. And if it was what Dave thought it would be, this entity in the theater, that he would be able to explain to him what he had seen before he ultimately decided never to go back. And when Dave gets to the theater, there's this back door that they would go into, and he sees Josh is standing just outside the theater. And Dave would say that Josh's eyes were, like saucers. He looked terrified. And so Dave has an inkling of what's going on, and he goes over to Josh and he's like, "What's going on? Is someone still in there?" He said that he had been doing security rounds and he had heard what sounded like voices when he was in the basement, and he didn't think much of it. He checked all the rooms, everything was shut. And when he made his way up to the third floor, he saw that the elevator had kicked on. It was in the basement, and suddenly the light was on and it was whirring up to the third floor. And when the elevator opened up, there was no one there. And he's standing there looking at it, and he looks inside, there's no one there, and then the alarm goes off. That's when he called in for backup. Dave says, "Look, let's just go search the building, we'll do it together." They clear the whole theater, no one's there. And before Dave leaves, they go into the main auditorium where the stage is, and they're just standing on the stage chatting with each other. And Dave, his back is to where the audience would be. And Josh is facing Dave, facing towards the seats. Josh just suddenly stopped. Mid-sentence, he's just frozen and looking just beyond Dave's shoulder. And Dave goes, "What?" And Josh goes, "There's something behind you." Dave slowly turns around, and as soon as he does, he can tell immediately what Josh is looking at. Standing in the very back of the theater away from them is a man standing in the corner with its hands by its sides. Its back is to them and it's looking down with a hood over its head. Dave turns his whole body around to look at this thing right as this thing turns around real quick and looks directly at them. It has these deep, dark, sunken eyes, and its face looks like it had been very badly burned, like it was black and charred. And it's looking at them before it just turns and runs out the back of the theater. Josh believed that that was an intruder. Dave was fairly certain that that was just another example of this entity that haunts the theater. But they would search the building and they could never find that cloaked figure again. And that was when Dave sat Josh down in the control room and he filled him in on why Morgan had quit and why he ultimately had quit. And he also told him the story from Blair. So Josh is like, "Great, I'm glad I work here now." This was the last time that Dave would go to the theater. But Dave would do some additional digging on the history of the theater. It would turn out that in the 40s, there was this horrible fire, and a man had been trapped in the basement when the fire had erupted, and he had died inside of the theater. And so Dave would share this information with Morgan and with Josh, and the three of them all believed that what they were witnessing was the ghost of that man who died in that fire. So I'd love to get your reaction to this. Was this a ghost or was this something else? I will get back to all of the early commenters. So get your comments in there, give me your theories, and I'll get back to all of the early commenters. If you enjoyed this story and you haven't already done this, please place the like button's feet in cement and then throw them into the ocean. Also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3, 4, even 5 video uploads. If you have a story suggestion for this channel, it can be your personal story or just a suggested story, please submit it on our subreddit. It's just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. I read that subreddit every day, so I promise I will get to your submission if you put it on there. And if I intentionally use your submission, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My username is JohnBallen416. I also recently just started using Twitter, and my username over there is JohnBallen416 as well. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, or some combination, I'm just very appreciative of your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. When I was a kid, one of my favorite places to go in the whole world was my grandmother's house. She lived in South Paris, Maine. About 2,000 people lived there, totally rural, and there's lots of forests everywhere. We'd get to my grandmother's big farmhouse, and we'd just immediately go off into the woods behind her property because it was like this vast expanse of wilderness. But as soon as it got dark at night, we would all be quick to go back inside because there was huge animals that lived in the wilderness of Maine, and you just didn't want to be out there past dark. And at night, I'd be looking out at this dark forest from the safety of my room, and I would always be so scared that a set of eyes were going to look back at me from somewhere in this dark forest. Luckily, that never happened to me. It did happen to a family just north of my grandmother's house, and it wasn't just one set of eyes, it was 5. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that's all I do, and I post 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, then I would encourage you to waterboard the like button, and then subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In 2005, Eric Martin was working in a paper mill in Maine. And he had been working at this paper mill for 20 years, and he was reaching up to get something on a shelf when he threw his back out. And in fact, he had slipped a number of discs, and it ultimately meant he was not able to work anymore. He was going to be disabled. And so he's suddenly out of work. His wife, Shelley Martin, was not working at the time, but when he couldn't work, she needed to get a job. And so Shelley, who had not worked in a long time, was able, through some connections, to land a job in her hometown in Maine called Palmyra. Palmyra was a very small, rural community. I mean, we're talking maybe 1,200 people that lived there. They also had a 17-year-old daughter named Chelsea who was not eager to go, but it was the only place they could afford, and so they had to go. Luckily, because Palmyra was such a cheap place to live relative to where they had been living, that for less money, they actually ended up getting a bigger piece of property than they had lived in before. It's this beautiful farmhouse that sat on a whole bunch of acreage, but it was incredibly isolated. You had to go down this bumpy access road to get to their long driveway, and then once you were on the property, you'd look out, and it was just a full 360 degrees of very dense forest that virtually no one was in. There was no nature trails. It was just dark, dense forest everywhere you looked. So even though no one's that happy about it, they end up moving into this farmhouse, and as they're unpacking their truck, Eric picks up one of his many rifles that he owned. Eric came from a long line of hunters. He loved to hunt. It was his favorite thing to do, and he had a whole bunch of guns that he kept. And as he's carrying the rifle into the house, Shelley says, "Oh no, we're not keeping the guns in the house. You have a barn, you're gonna put your guns in there." This had always been a point of contention for them in their marriage. Shelley just didn't feel safe having guns in the house, especially having kids in there. And so ultimately Eric agrees, okay, fine, I won't put my guns in the house, I'll put them in the barn. And so he went in the barn, and he and his son, Sean, who he had come out to help him, they built this gun case for all of his rifles. It was very heavy duty. They put it in the barn, and then they locked that and then locked the barn itself. So they were totally secure in the barn, but definitely not readily accessible. Over that first year, Shelley and Eric developed this ritual where at the end of the day, they would go out on the front porch of their farmhouse and look out onto the front yard, and they would drink coffee. It was something they both looked forward to, and virtually every night they did this. And so almost exactly a year after moving in, it was in early 2006, Shelley and Eric are sitting on their front porch, enjoying their coffee, they're chatting, and Shelley thinks she sees something in the woods. Now, you have to understand the layout and how far away they are from the woods to get a sense of what they were seeing. Right in front of their porch was a gravel road where they parked their cars. About 20 meters away from their house to the left is their barn, and beyond the barn, basically straight out from the porch, is this huge open field where there's no trees or anything. It was like open grazing area. And then way beyond the field was the beginning of this tree line, of this really dense forest. So we're talking at least a couple hundred meters away where she sees these lights. And she described it as like a pulsating light. It did not look like a car or some sort of vehicle, not to mention there was no road out straight ahead from their porch. It was just a dense forest where there was absolutely no one that should have been in there. Eric immediately, when he sees the lights, he thinks there's a poacher on his property, someone illegally hunting on his property. And so he gets Sean, his son, who did not live with them but was staying the night that night, he gets him to come outside and say, "Hey, do you think that's a poacher down there at the edge of our tree line?" And Sean's like, "I don't know, maybe." Eric decides that he wants to go tell this person to leave his property, and so he asks Sean to come with him. They figured they would just get to the edge of the property and yell out, "Hey, this is private property, you need to leave." As they're walking across the field and they're getting closer to the tree line, the lights, those pulsating lights, begin to fade and disappear back into the woods. And they get all the way up to the tree line and they can't see any lights at all. Even though at this point, standing on the edge of the forest, Eric and Sean are fairly confident that this poacher has left, they decide, just to be sure, let's walk a little ways into the woods. Even though it's totally dark, we're not gonna get lost. We'll walk a little ways into the woods and just continue to yell, "This is private property," so they really do leave. And so they begin walking, and it's And it's a very dense forest, lots of low-hanging limbs. It's not somewhere that's easy to walk. There's no walking trails or anything like that. And they walk, 10, 15 meters into the woods, and then they hear what sounds like someone walking parallel to them, maybe 15 meters away from them on their left. And they both stop and they look. They didn't want to take any chance that they were being stalked by a predator. And so they thought, you know what? The lights are gone. I don't know what animal this is. Let's just get out of here. About a month goes by, and Nathan, who is Chelsea's boyfriend, was staying with the family at the farm. And it was the first nice spring day. I mean, it was a very dark and dreary winter. Maine winters tend to be that way. And so that weekend, Nathan and Chelsea decide, let's go walk around the woods. So they take the 2 family dogs and they start walking across that big field in front of the house into the forest, the same area where Sean and Eric have been looking for those lights and then heard what sounded like an animal that was near them. And so at first, Chelsea has the dogs on leashes, but they get to the forest and she lets them off their leash to let them go run around and go crazy because they've been cooped up because of the wintertime as well. The 2 dogs instantly take off running for about 100 meters, and then they come to a dead stop right outside this big mound. It looks like a dirt mound, but they get up close to it and they can tell that it's actually more like a den. There are these huge pieces of wood that have been leaned into like a lean-to type structure with moss and dirt and grass put all over the outside. I mean, it looks like a very intentionally made mound, and there's a circular hole that's been created right on the front of it. And the dogs have stopped right outside and they're poking their heads in and smelling into this hole. And Nathan and Chelsea are looking at this thinking, who did this? Is this like a hunter's thing? Is this something a hunter might make? Would an animal make this? This seems really big for some animal to make this, but it definitely was made on purpose, whatever it is. And so Nathan, he just kind of looks down into this den, but it's totally dark, and he thinks he hears growling coming from inside of the den. And so without any hesitation, he goes, we gotta go. I don't know what's living in there, but we gotta go. And so they take the dogs, they put them back on leashes, and the 2 of them get out of the forest as quickly as they can. When Nathan and Chelsea came back to the house, they told Eric and Shelly, and actually Sean was there too, and they said, hey, we found this den of some kind out in the middle of the woods, basically straight out from your front porch. And that's when Eric and Sean said, well, about a month ago, we were out in that same area, and we could have sworn we heard some animal stalking us. A couple of months go by, and Eric and Shelly are sitting on their front porch having their coffee ritual, and there was just this low mist that kind of hung over the entire field. And as they're sitting there, they're commenting on how creepy it was. And what started as just kind of a friendly discussion about the general creepiness took a turn when they realized that they couldn't hear any wildlife. No crickets, no animals, no anything. And normally at night, because they were out here all the time, it was humming with life. And so Shelly had this high-powered flashlight that she always had out with her, and she starts scanning the property, not knowing what she's looking for, but it just seemed really odd that they couldn't hear any wildlife. But after she scans across the whole field, she doesn't see anything, and so she puts her flashlight down and just starts talking to Eric about whatever they normally talked about over coffee at night. Eric would say in numerous interviews that for whatever reason, when she put that flashlight down, he suddenly felt like they were in danger. He's looking out, he doesn't see anything, and then all of a sudden he says, you know what? We gotta go inside. I don't know what it is, but we gotta go inside. And Shelly's like, come on, I wanna stay out here for a little bit longer. We'll go in a few minutes. And Eric stands up and he's like, no, go inside. And he tries to grab her to kind of push her into the house. And she's kind of fighting against him. And then all of a sudden, Shelly stops. She goes, did you hear that? And Eric immediately knew that whatever it was, it's the reason he had that sudden feeling of being in danger. Eric turns around and he can't see anything because it's too dark. Shelly grabs her flashlight and she begins scanning the tree line. And she gets to the field and gets about halfway across the field right in front of them, and she stops. Because right in the middle of the field are 3 creatures that look like wolves. These huge creatures that are looking right at them. 2 others join them. So there's 5 wolf-like creatures that are staring at them right from the middle of their field. She says to Eric, what are those? And Eric, who's an experienced hunter, he has no idea. He goes, I think they're bears. It could be wolves. We gotta go inside. And so Shelly's just holding the light and they start charging directly at her so fast that she wasn't able to keep the light on them. They were already halfway across the field. They go inside, they shut the door and they lock it. And without saying a word, the 2 of them make their rounds across the entire bottom floor, lock every window, close every blind, make sure everything is shut. There was something different about these 5 creatures. The way they started running towards them, it just felt like they were targeting Eric and Shelly. And so even after the house had been secured, they didn't feel safe. And so they're standing in the middle of their cabin, and Eric's saying, my guns are in the barn. We have no protection. And Shelly is like, whatever you do, do not go out there. We don't know what these are. Could be a bear, it could be a wolf, we don't know. Don't go out there. Shelly goes upstairs, she shuts off all the lights, she makes sure all the windows are shut, and then she goes to Chelsea's room, her daughter, and she wakes her up and she says, hey, come here, you gotta look at this. And they go to the window and they kind of like poke their head into the window because they don't want to like totally open it up and stare out because they don't want the creatures to see them. But they're kind of poking their head out the window and she's like, look. And standing on the gravel are these 5 creatures that are just standing in a row looking directly at the house. It was like they were waiting for them to come out the front door. They were just patiently standing there looking at the house. It did not look like normal animal behavior at all. And as she's looking, one of the animals looks up at Shelly in the window, and the creature stands on its 2 legs. It gets on its hind legs and looks at her, and Shelly gasps and falls over because the creature's like 8 feet tall. And so Shelly's on the ground looking at Chelsea, and she can't believe what she just saw. It's like her brain can't process that this creature, one, had even seen her. They barely had their head up in the window. But that it stood on its hind legs, that it was so big. What are they doing? Sitting in a row right on the outside of the house waiting for us? What's going on here? And so Shelly tells Chelsea, get in your bed, don't go to your windows, don't leave this room. And that's when Shelly also remembers that she hasn't heard her 2 dogs. And she's worried they might be outside. And so she starts quietly walking all along the top floor looking for her dogs. She's calling to her 2 dogs, and they don't come out. Goes into the master bedroom and finds her 2 dogs hiding in the corner of the room next to each other, like they're startled by whatever it is outside. Meanwhile, Eric was pacing downstairs thinking he needed to go to the barn and he needed to get his guns to protect the family. But he knew that between his own disability, he can barely walk very fast, and he'd have to unlock the barn, and then he'd have to pull down the gun case, unlock that. All the while, he's exposed to these animals that are out there. And so the next best thing in his mind is maybe he could run outside, get in his truck, and back the truck up to the front door, and then he could get his wife and his daughter to come out, jump in the car, and they could drive away. So he just goes to the window and he pulls the blinds aside to look outside, and those 5 creatures are now gone. They're not sitting on the gravel path right in front of the house. He doesn't know where they are, but they're not in front of the house. And so he closes the blinds and he's like, well, I don't know where they are. It's too dangerous to go out there. He starts pacing some more and he goes back to look, and he sees them back in the field where they first saw them, all 5. You can see all 5. They're facing the house still, but he can see them because the moon has now popped through and he's got illumination on the field, and he can see all 5. And he's like, okay, maybe if I just keep my eye on them, I can open the door, run out, get the car, back it up without them seeing me. And so without telling Shelly, he opens the door and he goes onto the front porch and he sees them out in the field. He's got a good line of sight on them. Quiet as he can, he walks down the steps and he makes his way over to his truck, which is about 10 meters away. And as he's getting closer and closer to his truck, he's got his eye on the creatures that are in the field. They haven't moved. They apparently haven't seen him. He gets to the driver's side of his truck and he's got his keys out and he's kind of fumbling to hit the unlock button, and then his motion sensor light kicks on. And he's so on edge being out there, when the light kicks on, he drops his keys because he's so startled. And the first thing he does is he looks towards the field, and he sees that one of the 5 creatures is now standing on its hind legs looking at him directly. Before he even bends down to get his keys, he sees them all running towards him. He reaches down, he grabs his keys, he runs back to the house as fast as he can, and he gets inside and slams it right as he can hear them crossing the gravel right in front of the house. And he hears them bound onto the porch and start running around the wraparound porch. He's too scared to even look in the window, so he ducks down to get out of view. Shelly, who was upstairs, can hear everything going on, and she yells, Eric, what's going on? And he goes, stay up there, stay up there. Shelly, Eric, Chelsea, everyone's just frozen, waiting, knowing that these creatures are right on the other side, walking along his wraparound porch. And after a while, he hears the footsteps of these creatures leave the porch and go back onto the gravel area. And at some point, he pokes his head up and he looks, and all 5 are sitting there just facing the house, waiting for them to come out of the house. So he scurries up the stairs to where Shelly and Chelsea are, and they just are so scared. So they decide they gotta call the police. If nothing else, the police will drive up and their vehicle might scare away these creatures. But on the phone, Shelly lets on that what they're really scared about is something on their property. In fact, it's 5 creatures, things running around outside their property. And immediately the police officer who's responding to this, he's like, all right, well, are you sure it's not a moose? Are you sure it's not a bear? And finally she's like, no, can you please just come over here? And he's like, listen, ma'am, just keep your door shut, keep your windows shut, and I'm sure it'll be fine. And ultimately that's how the call ends. They're on their own. The family felt helpless, and Eric especially felt really frustrated because he can't protect his family. He doesn't have a weapon, he can't get to his vehicle, they're just trapped. And so they decide the only thing we can do is barricade ourselves inside of the house. And so for the next 30 minutes, they put heavy furniture in front of all the doors and the windows. They blocked everything as best as they could. They got kitchen knives, and they got an axe that they had inside to chop some wood. As they go upstairs, they lock themselves in the master bedroom with their weapons and their dogs. And they get on the bed and they just decide all we can do is wait until the sun comes up. During the time they were barricading their house, they would look out from time to time and they would see the 5 creatures just sitting on that gravel area right in front of their house, just waiting for them. When they finally went upstairs and barricaded themselves in that room, they immediately heard the creatures move off of the gravel, and they heard a couple of them at least walk onto the porch and start pacing around the porch. And it's totally silent besides the sounds of these creatures. And they were clearly communicating with each other. They were bumping into walls, and then they were howling at each other. There was clear communication happening where they were trying to coordinate some sort of attack on the family. Now, the way the house was set up is there was a second floor roof, and then the first floor was a little bit wider, and the second floor had its own kind of separate roof. And after a while, the creatures stopped walking on the porch. They left the porch and it's just silence. And then they would hear them jump onto that first roof. The scary thing about this is that if you walked around the roof, you could actually look into the second floor windows. And so they're laying there, and periodically they'd be looking out their window. There was windows on either side of the room they were in, but there was a thin curtain between them and the window. And so from time to time, these creatures would walk past their windows and they would stop, they'd put their paws up onto the window and they would look inside. But there was a very thin sheet between them and the glass, so they couldn't see the creature, and the creature couldn't see them. All night, they're listening to these creatures running around. And sometimes they'd hear really loud scratching, like they had figured something out and they were trying to burrow their way into the house. But after a whole night of this, they never actually broke the glass. They never got inside the house. As the sun started to come up in the morning, the creatures jumped off the roof and they could hear them running away. And for about an hour, they didn't hear anything outside. The sun's come up and they felt safe again. And so they left their room, they go downstairs, and they finally open it up, and all over their property are signs of huge creatures that had been on their property. Massive footprints with huge claws at the end. They found tufts of hair that had gotten caught on fence posts, and even scarier is they found all these points on the house, in particular on the second floor when they were walking on that roof, where there was clear markings that they had tried to burrow into the house. There were these deep-seated scratch marks into the side of the house. The front door had been scratched apart. I mean, it was very clear that whatever these creatures were, they were trying to get into the house, but they'd just been unsuccessful. This experience was so traumatic for the family that they sold the house and they moved very quickly after that, and they have not experienced anything like that since they left. So what do you think those creatures were? Was that a bear, a wolf, or something else? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I will get back to all the early commenters. So get in there and give me your best theory. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't done this already, please waterboard the like button and subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or Twitter. My username on both those platforms is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is MrBallen. Got a ton of content over there as well. If you have a story submission, whether it's your own personal story or just a suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit, just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below, and I read it every day. So if I intentionally use your story suggestion that I find on there, I will absolutely credit you. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, here on YouTube, or some combination, I'm just incredibly thankful for your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya. Every year, hundreds of people go missing inside of national parks and forests all over North America. Normally, you can attribute these disappearances to things like getting lost, not having the right equipment or enough food or water, or even getting attacked by a predator. But every year, there's always a handful of cases where people go missing under baffling conditions. They were right in front of their friends or family who turn around for a second, and when they turn back, they're gone. Or people vanish and then reappear days later in locations that are impossible to get to. One man named David Paulides, who's a former police detective, began investigating these strange disappearances and started compiling what he was finding in a book series called Missing 411. And he's discovered that there are thousands and thousands of these totally strange disappearances. They're everywhere, and no one's talking about it except for people that are aware of David Paulides and the missing 411 phenomenon. And so I plan to, at least once a week, highlight a handful of cases that really show off how bizarre this phenomenon really is. But before we get into today's missing 411 stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, I would ask you to politely pull out an M67 frag grenade, pull the pin, and gently lob it in the direction of the like button. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 2014, Aaron Hedges was 38 years old, he lived in Montana, and he was an avid hunter. During the hunting season, Aaron was known to spend almost every weekend or every other weekend hunting in one particular area known as the Crazy Mountains, or the Crazies for short. The Crazies are a mountain range in Montana that are actually disconnected from the Rocky Mountains, so they're very isolated, and they're beautiful, but they're incredibly rugged and very steep. Aaron knew this area like the back of his hand because he was there all the time hunting. In fact, he was there so often that he began placing caches of sleeping bags, food, water. He cached this all over the Crazies. And he knew how to get to his cache points without the use of a map. He just could look around and know where he was, and he could walk to his cache point. On September 3rd, 2014, Aaron, along with 2 of his close friends, decided to go on a hunting trip to the Crazies for a week. They planned on staying right next to this lake called Campfire Lake, but in order to get to it, they had to hike into the Crazies. You could not drive a car to where they were going to stay. So they got 2 horses and a pack mule, and Aaron loaded much of his gear onto the pack mule. And so they begin this hike up to Campfire Lake. And a little ways into this first day hike, the mule spooks at something and runs away. In the process of running away from them, it ditched all of their equipment all over the place, and they couldn't recover it all. Now, after they gathered up what they could and got the mule back and continued their walk, Aaron decided he didn't feel like going to one of his cache points to try to retrieve an extra sleeping bag, and he said, I'm just going to use whatever extra gear you guys have, I'll make do. And so they continue on, they get to Campfire Lake, and they set up their camp, and for the first couple of days, everything is going just fine. On the 3rd day, Aaron decided that, you know what, I could tough it out, but I'm just going to go north to one of my cache points and get that extra sleeping bag and try to get a few other things that were lost and make my living arrangements a little bit more comfortable while I'm here. And so his 2 buddies, they know that Aaron is in this section of the Crazies all the time. And so they didn't bat an eye when he says he's going to go off on his own. It wasn't a very far distance to this cache point. They said, okay, we'll see you later tonight. So Aaron takes off, and after a little while, one of his buddies, for whatever reason, uses his radio to reach out to Aaron. The walkie-talkies they were using had this LED screen that anytime you transmitted traffic on it, it would register your GPS location and transmit that to the person you're talking to. So when he hailed Aaron at about 10 in the morning after he had left to go up to his cache point, when Aaron radioed back, it showed up on their LED screen that instead of going north to this cache point, he had deviated and gone very far to the east. And he would say on the radio, Aaron would say back to them, hey guys, I got mixed up and I missed the turn to go up to the cache point. I'm trying to find the trail to get back to the cache point. But they expect him, based on what he said, that he was just going to turn and go to the cache point and come back to where they were at some point that night. But here's the first weird thing about this case. Aaron got turned around and basically missed the turn at this really obvious fork in the trail. If you go this way, you'll get to your cache. If you go this way, you'll end up where Aaron is, and it's the complete wrong way. And you know it's the wrong way because on your right-hand side, if you're going this way, there's going to be a creek on your right. Whereas if you go towards the cache, you're going uphill and there's no creek. So for Aaron, in perfect weather conditions, to have missed a very obvious fork in the road that he knows well is a little bit strange. Not to mention where he showed up on their GPS when they talked to him on the radio, he was a ways down the wrong direction. He would have been next to that creek for long enough that he should have already turned around. It's like making a wrong turn and going 45 minutes to an hour in the wrong direction when you already know it's the wrong direction. Why are you still going that way? But his friends were not that concerned. They had just spoken to him on the radio. He's saying, I got turned around. They're expecting him now to show up a little bit later in the day, maybe in the evening at some point. So that night when he doesn't show up, they try radioing him and they can't get through to him. and they decide that, you know what, it's not that easy to call authorities. They didn't have cell reception out there, and it would have been about a day's hike before they could even get to a place where they could call authorities. So they decide, let's just stay here tonight. He could show up at any point in the middle of the night, and tomorrow, if he's not here, we'll go looking for him. The next morning, his friends get up. This is on September 6th. There's no Aaron. So they head off in the direction of this cache, and they start looking for Aaron. And all day, they're calling for him. They're trying to radio him. Nothing, no sign of him. The following morning, on the 7th, they do leave the area. They give up on their hunting trip, and they head out of the Crazies to contact authorities. Authorities launch this massive search for Aaron. But as soon as they launch this search, this massive storm rolls in, dumping 2 feet of snow within the first 12 hours of their search. So they really weren't able to accomplish much in those first 2 days, which brings us to September 9th. One of the main areas that they were looking for Aaron was following that path that he had gone down, the wrong path, away from his cache. They followed that path down along that creek and were looking for anywhere along the creek that he might have been. And there was this cliff that overlooked the creek, and on this cliff, next to a tree, they found Aaron's boots, neatly placed side by side as if put there intentionally. Next to his boots was a very obvious fire pit where someone had started a fire. In the fire pit was a cigarette container that was Aaron's brand. It looks every bit like Aaron had been here, smoked a cigarette, took his boots off for some reason, and had been sitting next to this fire. Also next to the fire was Aaron's camelback water bladder, as well as some of the straps that went to his backpack that had been burned inside of the fire pit. But there's no sign of Aaron or his remains anywhere near there. Also, the people who found the boots and the fire said that we were in this specific area over the past 2 days. This wasn't here. At this point, investigators believed that Aaron must have been suffering from severe hypothermia, where in severe cases, people are known to actually strip their clothing. And so searchers created a new search area based on his boots, thinking he had to have been at this fire pit smoking a cigarette. He took his boots off because he's got hypothermia, and he wandered off, but he can't have gotten far. We're talking 2 feet of snow on the ground in rugged terrain, and he's barefoot. But despite searching extensively in their new search area, they couldn't find Aaron or any sign of him. 9 months later, a family, the Rhines family, who lived near the base of the Crazy Mountain Range, they were doing their yearly maintenance on their fence that went around their entire property. And one of the family members decided to take a break from the work and walk up into the Crazies just a little ways up to just sit on the mountain and look out across the land. It was a beautiful view. And as he's walking up, he gets about a mile from the property itself, and he spots an orange vest under a tree. And so he figures a hunter must have lost their gear. So he walks up and he sees that not only is there an orange hunting vest laying on the ground, but there is a backpack that would turn out to be Aaron Hedges' backpack leaning up against a tree, as if placed there on purpose. Inside of the pack was Aaron Hedges' wallet and license, along with a loaded gun and food and water. Next to the pack, there was this rock. And on the rock was a thermos that was open, along with an open energy drink, as if Aaron had set his pack down and then sat on this rock and was sipping an energy drink out of his thermos. If Aaron had been sitting on that rock, as it appears he was, you can clearly see the Rhines property a mile away from you. It's right in front of you. It would be impossible not to see. Additionally, this location was 6 miles away from where Aaron's boots were found. So all of Aaron's gear is brought to the authorities, who go out and they look for Aaron, and there's no sign of Aaron in the area. Another year would go by, and a couple of horseback riders would be riding past that same area where the backpack was found, and they see a human skull sitting underneath a tree. Sure enough, it winds up being Aaron Hedges' skull, and his skeletal remains were all there, except for his feet. His feet were never found, but the coroner could not determine a cause of death. So a couple of questions come to mind. How did Aaron, a guy that knows the Crazies inside and out, make that wrong turn in the first place? He should have known better. But even if we say he got turned around, it can happen to the best of us, he would have known he was going in the wrong direction because the creek would be on his right, but he kept going because we find his campsite with his boots way down the path that was in the wrong direction. But even if we're willing to accept that as why he was at that campsite, he took off his boots. And then he walked 6 miles in 2 feet of snow to a location that was literally looking at safety. The Rhines property is right there. You have food, you have water, and you're sitting there drinking a drink. You have a loaded gun, you can fire it into the air to try to get someone's attention, but you don't use your resources, you don't go to safety, you die. In 2018, Terrence Woods was a 27-year-old filmmaker slash journalist who had, ever since graduating college, traveled the world, filming in locations that are very rugged and sometimes quite dangerous for these documentaries and TV shows that he was known to work on. In October of that year, Terrence was going to travel to Idaho with a production company called Raw TV. They were doing a TV series around an abandoned gold mine called the Penman Mine. Penman Mine was located in an area that is quite rugged in the middle of the backcountry. Terrence had previously worked on 2 different backcountry shoots. One was done in Turkey and the other was done in Alaska. So he wasn't an expert by any means, but he was accustomed to being out in the wilderness to do some of these shoots. Prior to leaving for the trip, he had texted a number of his friends and just said he wasn't really that excited about going on the trip. His friends would later say to investigators that his language was not alarming. He was just kind of complaining about not wanting to go on a particular work trip, so it didn't stand out to them at all. Terrence arrives in Idaho in early October. He texts his father to let him know that he's landed, he's made it to the hotel. Everything seems to be going normally. He was supposed to be there until mid-November, and that's what everybody in his circle was expecting. So on October 5th, when Terrence sent a text to his father that just said, "I'm going to be coming home on October 10th, and there was no explanation, his father wondered why. And so he wrote a response and said, "Why are you cutting your trip short?" But he never got a response because Terrence had actually already left for the day on October 5th to go do a shoot at this mine, and he'd be out of cell phone reception. On October 5th, the crew that was around Terrence all day reported that he was acting very strangely. He was very quiet, withdrawn, wasn't really talking to anybody. And at the end of the day, when they were wrapping up shooting, one of the producers was sitting in a vehicle waiting for everyone to kind of finish up, packing up, and Terrence said he wanted to go relieve himself. And he walked over to the edge of this cliff, and for whatever reason, this producer, he didn't know why, but he just thought he needed to look to see if Terrence was okay. And he turns to look where Terrence was standing at the edge of this cliff, and Terrence isn't there anymore, and he sees Terrence's radio is now sitting on the ground standing there. And there was just something about the scene that he saw that he instinctively knew something's wrong, and he actually ran up the cliff in case Terrence had fallen off of it. But when he got to the edge of the cliff and looked over, he was shocked to see that Terrence was down there, about 15 feet down, but wasn't laying on the ground like he had fallen. He was sprinting down the hill, not saying a word, not looking up, running at full speed down the hill into the forest. The producer didn't know what to do. He kind of yelled to some other people and said, "Hey, what's Terrence doing?" No one knew. And so the producer and somebody else also began chasing after Terrence. But after a little while, they couldn't catch up to him, and they were worried that by chasing after him, they might scare him. And so instead, they immediately go and they call authorities, and this huge search is launched for Terrence. So for a week, you have all these people looking for Terrence. You have people on foot, you have dog teams, you have a helicopter with infrared technology. You have all these people combing this area, and there's no sign of Terrence. One of the search and rescue officers commented that it would have been so hard to get away from this search because the ground inside of that forest was so covered with fallen trees that there were times where you were just walking on fallen trees. You weren't even touching the ground. And so the idea that Terrence could run in there and effectively evade this massive search that had kind of encircled the area, it just didn't make any sense, but there was just no trace of him. And to this day, we have no idea where he went. There's never been a sign of what happened to Terrence. He just started running away for reasons we don't understand and disappeared. On the same day that Terrence Woods goes missing, 56 miles away in the same mountain range, a 76-year-old woman named Connie Johnson also goes missing under very strange circumstances. Connie was an outdoors woman through and through. She had previously worked as a wilderness ranger for the U.S. Forest Service, and she was known to take young people out on trips along the backcountry and teach them how to survive. Her friends said that she had tremendous survival skills and spent much of her time alone in the woods. Connie was working as a camp cook for Ritchie Outfitters. It was a company that organized hunting trips in the Idaho and Montana backcountry. The camp that she was actually working at was not accessible by vehicle. You had to get there on foot or on horseback. On October 2nd, all of the hunters at the Ritchie Outfitters camp that she was working in left for a 3-day hunting trip. They said bye to her and bye to her dog Ace, and they were gone. She was the only person at the camp. The following day, they got a very strange radio transmission from Connie. They couldn't understand what she was saying. They couldn't tell if she was mumbling or if there was something wrong, or maybe it could have been the radio. But when no one could understand what she was saying, they ultimately said, okay, I'm sure she's fine. And so a couple days go by, and on October 5th, the hunting party returns to the cabin, and Connie's gone, as well as her dog Ace. They're both gone. All they could find was Connie's jacket was laying over her gun that was sitting on a picnic table. That was it. A very intense search was launched that included the National Guard, the Air Force, helicopters, dog teams, ground searchers. They couldn't find her or her dog. And so on October 16th, they called off the search. 3 weeks later, Ace, her dog, would show up 15 miles away from where they had gone missing. The dog was emaciated, but was okay. They fed the dog, and then they tried to get the dog to help them find Connie, but to no avail. To this day, we have no idea where Connie went or why she left the camp to begin with. In February of 2008, the Pilkington family, which was David and Camilla, along with their 2 sons, Timothy and William, who was 7 years old, were on vacation on the west coast of Vancouver Island. They were staying in this tiny little town called Tofino, which was at the end of one of the peninsulas on the island. There was maybe 20 streets in the town. There was only a handful of places that you could stay. Everybody knew everybody on the island. I mean, it was really a tiny place. One morning, David wakes up early and decides he wants to take both of his sons down to one of Tofino's beaches. And so he gets Timothy and William, they walk over and they go down this flight of steps that leads down onto the beach itself. And when they get to the bottom of the steps, William says he wants to stay at the foot of the stairs. Timothy wants to go actually walk around the beach with David. And so David couldn't convince William to come with him and with Timothy. And so he says, okay, William, you stay right here. I'm gonna go with Timothy for a couple of minutes and walk around the beach. So David and Timothy walked only about 10 or 15 meters away from William, who was just standing at the foot of the stairs, just watching his dad and his brother. And at some point, David would say that he turned his back on his son. He said it was maybe for a minute. And he was looking at Timothy and they were doing whatever they were doing. And then when he turned around, William wasn't there anymore. And so David instinctively runs over because there's nobody else down there. There's nowhere really for him to have gone. But he runs over, he's looking on the sides of the stairs. He can't find his son. You know, he's looking where he could have gone, and it only made sense for him to probably go up the stairs. It wouldn't have been long enough for him to get into the water. It had only been about a minute he had turned his back. And so he goes up the stairs, he's looking around, he can't find his son. And this huge search is launched for this boy because this just happened. It's a very small area. They figure they can find this kid. The main area they were going to look was inside of the forest. Tofino had a very dense forest right in the middle of it. And since the beach butted up against the forest, they figured that the boy could have walked up the stairs and made it into the forest in that 1 minute that his father's back was turned. And so after an exhaustive search of this forest and there's no sign of him, unfortunately investigators began to look to the beach and were waiting for a body to wash up on shore because historically the only people that ever went missing in Tofino were either found in the forest or they washed up on the beach. Those are the only 2 places you can go. There isn't anywhere else you can go. But the boy never washed up on a beach and they never found a shred of evidence ever in the forest where that boy was. He just vanished. So unfortunately, like basically all of the missing 411 cases, you have a baffling set of circumstances with no clear resolution. We don't know what happened to these people, and we probably never will. But that doesn't stop us from theorizing about what could have happened, so I'd love to hear in the comments, and I'll get back to as many of you as I possibly can. If you want to learn more about Missing 411, I do have a playlist just called Missing 411. Or what I would suggest is going right to the source. Check out David Paulides and his book series called Missing 411. I provided links below of how to get his books. I've also provided his YouTube channel in the description as well. So please go check out David Paulides and his team at Can-Am Missing Project. They're amazing, and it's why we have any of this information to begin with. If you enjoyed today's video and you haven't done this already, I would ask you to politely take an M67 frag grenade, pull the pin, and gently lob it towards the like button. Also, please subscribe to my channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. If you have a story suggestion, we have a subreddit just called MrBallen's. It's linked in the description below. I check it every single day, and if I intentionally use your story suggestion, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My username is JohnBallen416. I also just started a Twitter account where my handle is also JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok where my handle is MrBallen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, or here on YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya.